Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy and you're watching The Morgue. And yes, I missed you too. We took a week off for PAX, and if you haven't had time to see it already, I would highly encourage you to go check out jupiterbroadcasting.com/PAX. In there we have a whole collection of all the video footage that we gathered over our weekend at the convention, including extensive gameplay of Guild Wars 2 and Firefall, as well as some exclusive footage of a new Relic Assault mode coming in an upcoming beta update to Rusty Hearts, and a Guild Wars 2 lore panel that, to my knowledge, can't be found anywhere else on the internet at this time. But the PAX coverage does not stop there. In fact, today's episode of The Morgue is going to have even more to shove in your face holes, but with a very specific angle to it. You see, over the past several weeks, one game company's name has continued to come up in the news again and again through a series of acquisitions, announcements, and new product releases. Perfect World Entertainment is becoming a household name, even here in the Western MMO markets. To such a degree, in fact, that I am dedicating today's entire episode to Perfect World and the various development studios that work under them to produce their products. But as I said, this is also going to include PAX coverage because, as it just happens, many of the news stories that have recently come out from Perfect World, I actually happen to have talked to CEOs and press contacts and all sorts of people connected to Perfect World about these stories in particular. So bonus, right? Hopefully I'll be able to give you a slightly different take as what you might have already read on some of your favorite gaming news sites. Coming up later in today's episode, I'll give you my first look at an upcoming free-to-play first-person shooter deathmatch game from Zombie Studios called Blacklight Retribution, which I actually got to get my hands on there on the floor at PAX. This is also being produced by Perfect World, as well as some new details about Torchlight II and the eventual launch of the Torchlight MMO. But before we get into talking about any of that, the first thing that I want to talk about is Cryptic Studios. As all of you out there are aware, I've been following the story pretty closely since their acquisition at the hands of Perfect World and all of the ensuing chaos that has come out in the communities around Champions Online and Star Trek Online. Well, in a recent conference call hosted by the Perfect World CEO, he told investors some very important news about the future of Cryptic Studios, including the big reveal that Star Trek Online would be transitioning to a free-to-play subscription model by the end of 2011. In a move that surprised practically nobody, it was recently announced that Star Trek Online will be adopting a free-to-play subscription model in the near future. However, there was one fact that surprised me personally, and that is the timeline on this. According to the conference call from the CEO of Perfect World, this will be happening by the end of 2011. I didn't foresee it happening that quickly. But I did know this was coming for a few very specific reasons. First of all, both Star Trek Online and Cryptic Studios' superhero game Champions Online have had a cash shop included since day one. And while many out there have accused Cryptic Studios of having this as sort of a cake-have-eat scenario, I always personally saw it as more of a dipping your toes into the free-to-play market, see what kind of revenue stream you could get from it, and get players of the game used to the concept of buying items on a cash shop. I also personally get the impression, and I don't have really any hard facts or quotes to back this up, but I get the impression that the whole subscription model thing came very heavily as pressure from their former publisher, Atari, which, as we all know, did not exactly have the deep financial pockets to support the long-term strategies that are required to develop and maintain a free-to-play MMO. They needed the cash influx of box sales and an ongoing subscription cost just to keep Atari afloat, and even that really didn't help that much. But anyway, there's one other reason that I saw this as pretty much a foregone conclusion once the acquisition by Perfect World went through, and that is that if Star Trek Online had remained a subscription-based game, it would have been the only game on Perfect World's books that actually offered a monthly subscription option. And that's very unlikely. However, on that same subject, I would like to point out that during this conference call, wherein this news first surfaced, Perfect World also mentioned that they were actually leveraging Cryptic Studios' existing subscription options to give them more of a foothold in the subscription-based MMO market, meaning that we might actually see future MMOs from Perfect World, or maybe even their existing ones, that start to offer subscription options in addition to their standard free-to-play subscription model. Now, how do I personally feel about this? Well, I think I can sum up pretty simply by saying I see this as a very, very good thing for the future of Star Trek Online. I've spoken with potential players of the game and Trek fans from all walks of life, and all of them tend to indicate that the primary barrier from getting them to try out Star Trek Online has always been the monthly subscription fee. Not the box cost, Not the fact that it's online and not the somewhat spotty reviews of the title, but the subscription fee has always stopped them. By completely eliminating that barrier for entry, Cryptic and Perfect World have opened their doors to a whole new type of gamer for this title. And those gamers will be allowed the opportunity to vote with their wallets as to whether or not Star Trek Online is worth their financial investment. Now, why would they consider it to be worth it? Well, personally, I think that the primary thing Star Trek Online has going for it at this point is the Foundry. They have this whole set of unique UGC tools. That's user-generated content. Extremely robust, and practically the only game in the MMO market that actually offers the players the opportunity to create their own missions, their own stories that can be played by other players in the game. Now, early indications about the free-to-play subscription model that Star Trek Online will be offering indicate that free players will not be allowed to create missions using the Foundry, but they will probably be allowed to play those missions, meaning that they can actually witness the tool set in action. And if they see really good missions, that could even possibly entice them to spending money on a subscription or buying access through the cash shop if such a thing is going to be available, and thereby becoming part of that UGC community for Star Trek Online. Now, in order for this to happen, free players actually need to be presented with the absolute best of the best missions that Star Trek Online UGC creators have to offer. And in order for that to happen, Cryptic has to step up their community-based efforts around the UGC community and really support this as a core, fundamental focus of their community-based efforts. If you reinforce the players out there that are making your game look the absolute best that it can look, you'll reap the benefits tenfold. Now, as you're probably aware, Jupiter Broadcasting also puts on a video podcast entirely dedicated to Star Trek Online. So if you'd like to hear a more in-depth editorial on this subject, I'd recommend you head over and watch the next few episodes of Stoked, starting with about episode 96. As this story continues to develop, Chris and myself will be continuing to cover it and continuing to offer our opinions on what it means for the future of Star Trek Online, and exactly what the free-to-play transition means, all of its implications to existing subscribers and the future player base, as well as Cryptic Studios' other projects. In other Perfect World / Cryptic Studios news, I thought I'd mention that earlier in August, we actually received confirmation that the launch date of Neverwinter has been officially delayed by Perfect World from an original launch window of late 2011 all the way back to late 2012. The quote from Perfect World is that they wanted to take this extra amount of time to invest in a more immersive experience. Well, pardon me for a second, but hell yes, it is about damn time that more game publishers out there realize that prematurely launching a product before it's actually ready to be seen by the public can do way more harm than any cash influx from the sale of boxes could potentially bring to your studio. We've already seen this happen in the previously mentioned Star Trek Online, which has been universally acknowledged by both its staunchest fans and the developers of the product itself to have launched way ahead of when it should have to be considered a fully fleshed out product. And the result of that has been a general lack of consumer confidence in Cryptic Studios by the gaming public. And possibly the inability for Star Trek Online to find long-term success that it could have if it had launched as a more fully featured, finished product if they'd been given another year or two of development time. So, lessons learned. Neither Cryptic Studios nor Perfect World want that to happen again, and so Neverwinter will be out when it's ready. And I, for one, am thankful to be kept waiting. Another bit of news that leaked out of this conference call held by the CEO of Perfect World is that there is now a launch window set aside for the eventual release of the Torchlight MMO. And according to the statements by Perfect World, this may be coming out as early as late 2012. Now, as it so happens, I actually managed to have a nice chat with Max Schaefer, the CEO of Runic Games, during my time at PAX. Now, Runic Games are the makers of Torchlight, Torchlight II, and the eventual Torchlight MMO. Now, during our conversation, he did tell me that it has always been Runic Games' goal to eventually launch a Torchlight MMO, and that cutting their teeth on Torchlight and Torchlight 2 has been a necessary part of that process by learning through their mistakes and other lessons that they picked up while developing those two titles. They're all the more prepared for the eventual launch of their MMO dream product. However, nowhere in that conversation did he seem to be indicating that they were moving forward on that project already. In fact, he actually hinted at one point that Runic might be taking a break from the Torchlight franchise in the near future, after the launch of Torchlight II. I think it's safe to say that the future of Runic's gaming pipeline is not really set in stone right now. It might even be that they're waiting to see whether or not the financial success of Torchlight II pans out to such a degree that an MMO would be a viable product right away. And one of the reasons that that might be in doubt is that unlike the original Torchlight, Torchlight II is going to be a PC-only game. There's actually been a recent statement from Max that indicates that they were unable to get Torchlight II under the download limits for the Xbox Live Arcade, and so the game has no intention of coming to consoles in the immediate future. Well, as some of you might be aware, the success of Torchlight on consoles has been a big driving factor of pushing forward the development of Torchlight 2. So not having a console version available of the sequel does put into question the future of the franchise, and we're going to have to see how it pans out after the game launches. Now, as for the MMO itself, I feel that there might have been some crossed wires here between Runic and Perfect World about the future of that MMO franchise, and I really wouldn't be surprised to see that this initial launch estimation is off by a number of years. Now, I don't really doubt that the Torchlight MMO is going to eventually happen. After talking to Max and some other of the guys there at Runic, they definitely have that as their future goal. Their eventual dream product is to launch that MMO. But I really don't see this happening by the end of 2012, and I'm not sure where Perfect World is coming from on this. Now, as for Torchlight 2 itself, I actually had the distinct privilege of getting my hands on the co-op gameplay available there on the floor at PAX, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed everything about this experience. Now, as many of you that follow the gaming industry might be aware, Blizzard has come out over the past month or so and announced some features that are coming with Diablo 3 that have turned off a lot of potential gamers and potential customers, buyers of Diablo 3, including the fact that there will be no offline multiplayer, and possibly no offline mode at all, no modding support of any type, and an auction house where players can sell in-game items for real-life currency. All of these factors have really enraged potential buyers of Diablo 3, but Runic Games has taken these announcements and spun them to their own advantage, setting themselves apart from the game that they were once likened to as a clone. First of all, LAN gaming is available in Torchlight 2. Not only allowed, but encouraged. It is the primary first option you see when you enter into a multiplayer game. Now, during my conversation with Max Schaefer, I asked him if Runic Games was concerned at all about the fact that this opens the door to a certain amount of piracy. And he told me, in a word, no. In fact, he feels that piracy can potentially drive additional sales of your game. Instead of the wide-held belief that having some form of draconian DRM is the only way to protect the fact that people will pay money for your game. Well, Runic seems to feel exactly the opposite of that. In fact, he mentioned as an example of maybe you go to a friend's game and have a nice LAN gaming session using Torchlight 2, where the two of you get to play together. Well, Runic feels that you're likely to enjoy that experience so much that when you go home, you'll buy a copy of the game for yourself. And with a $20 ticket price, I can see that happening. Now, as for the modding community, Torchlight 2 is actually going to launch with the retail version, including an entire set of the actual development tools used to create the game itself. And while there's going to be a very steep learning curve associated with, this means that a dedicated modder could actually create in Torchlight 2 absolutely anything that they could envision, anything they can imagine. Whether that be a new campaign or a new series of maps or even fundamentally altering the gameplay mechanics of Torchlight 2 itself. One of the common examples that's used and has been floating around the web recently is eliminating the upper cap on multiplayer, which at the time of launch for Torchlight 2 is probably going to be between 4 and 8 players in a single LAN gaming session or online player match. But using modding, you could potentially completely eliminate that boundary, allowing as many players as you like to enter the same map. As for a real-world auction house, well, basically, I was told that Torchlight 2 just can't support that and has no intention of supporting anything of that nature. In fact, there doesn't actually exist any form of a trading interface within the game. In order to trade items with somebody in a multiplayer match, you basically just drop it on the ground and let them pick it up. So trying to attach any sort of a currency-based system to trading items between different players it's just not on Runic's plate right now. Or to paraphrase his statement, Runic doesn't plan to cash in on you enjoying to advance your character. So, in essence, Torchlight 2 is actually shaping up to be more Diablo-y than the actual game that's going to wear that moniker on their next sequel. And Runic claims that they are on track to be releasing this game on PC by the end of this year. Now, it's time to switch gears entirely and talk about a new upcoming title being made by Zombie Studios and published by Perfect World. Now, this title actually caught my eye on the floor at PAX because I thought I was just watching some chintzy little Counter-Strike clone, and I didn't realize why there was such a big crowd at the booth. Until I heard the host that was guiding people through this 4 versus 4 PvP deathmatch there on the floor tell everybody to activate their wall hacks. Welcome to Blacklight Retribution, an Unreal Engine DirectX 11-based deathmatch first-person shooter set in the near future of modern urban warfare. Now, I actually don't know if there's an actual backstory to this game, but to be honest, based on the gameplay, I'm not sure there actually needs to be one. This looks like just a fun game to pick up and shoot some people in the face with. And I'm not actually going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this title, as it definitely is not an MMO. Despite having a pretty heavy online presence, it being a deathmatch shooter after all, the lack of any real form of persistence really rules out any sort of an MMO moniker. But it is being published by an MMO company, Perfect World, and so I thought it might deserve some sort of a mention here. Now, the primary selling point of Blacklight Retribution is instant action. Beyond just being able to load up quickly into a deathmatch using their matchmaking system, just, a traditional matchmaking system online, there's also, through the use of something called the Hyper Reality Vision, or HRV, you will actually be able to use in the game a wall hack that enables you to see your friends and enemies and capture points and a few other necessary things through the walls of the maps that you'll be loaded into. Now, the presence of this built-in wall hack mechanic actually ends up adding an extra layer of strategy to the game because everybody has it. So beyond just being able to know whether or not you can see the enemy through the wall, you have to know whether or not he's looking at you and looking through the same wall to see that you're there looking at him. It almost feels like some sort of game of cat and mouse, or except you're both cats and both mouse. Anyway, let's say chess. I'll say that my hands-on experience with this game on the floor at PAX was a much more cerebral experience than I actually expected from a first-person deathmatch shooter, all because of that extra single mechanic. Now, in addition to this, there is one set of features that I think might appeal to a typical MMO gamer to a certain degree. There's a very robust customization set of features in the game where you can customize your weapons, your armor, in a whole array of ways. First of all, adding modifications to certain weapons like a laser sight onto your pistol or using a certain type of weapon ammo in a sniper rifle or something like that. But it can also be as simple as adding decals to your weapons and armor or changing their colors. And I realize that might sound a little chintzy, a little worthless, but it is fun. And really, it's no more ridiculous than adding a custom hat to your avatar in Team Fortress 2. And really, fans of Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike Source are really going to want to check this game out, at least just to give it a shot, because it's free. I mean that. You can get into this game for absolutely no cost whatsoever, except the time spent to download it. I would caution you, however, that the game's minimum system recs are a bit on the high side. That is because Zombie Studios specifically wants to make sure that their game is a cut above what you might see in the average console-based shooter. They're dedicating their gameplay to the PC platform, which also means that their UI will not have any potential of suffering from any sort of, being dumbed down for players that are potentially used to playing with a controller to frag their buddies. Blacklight Retribution is undergoing an extensive pre-beta phase right now, and they're hoping to be able to roll out this title before the end of 2011. However, in speaking with one of their Zombie Studios reps there on the floor at PAX, they mentioned that they're very serious about making sure that they have a bug-free and balanced experience ready to roll out on day one, and that they may delay the launch if they don't think that they can deliver that. Now, this statement was reinforced by the fact that when I asked a Perfect World rep the exact same question, they told me that the launch date is at the discretion of Zombie Studios and hadn't yet been finalized. And that's it for this week's episode of The Morgue. As we look back on the stories that we've covered in today's episodes, we actually see a lot of similar trends, even though these are 3 different development studios developing very vastly different types of games. Nonetheless, there are a number of design philosophies that are shining through as commonalities. One is that all of these development studios are producing high-quality PC-centric titles, regardless of the type of gameplay, whether it's an MMO, a shooter, or an action RPG. The second thing is that all of these companies are either eliminating or vastly reducing the financial barrier for entry for playing these games, for getting in and enjoying them, and then to allow the gamer to actually vote with their wallet to determine whether or not the game is worth their financial support. And the third commonality is that all of these developers now seem to agree that you do not launch a product unless it is absolutely ready to be seen and consumed by the public. Now, I have to say, as a gamer and as an industry enthusiast, I completely agree with all of these principles, and if Perfect World can actually stick to their guns on these, I could see myself becoming a long-term supporter of the company in general. The only hiccup that still remains is the fact that so many of their games are driven by cash shops, and there's a very large potential of any of their titles falling into that pay-to-win atmosphere that I've spoken out against so frequently on this show. In fact, Perfect World up to this date actually sits on both sides of that fence depending on which game title you're looking at. Personally, I'd like to urge them that as they continue to get more and more of a foothold here in the Western markets, they need to get further and further away from that concept of pay to win if you want to engender a good, strong, and dedicated fan base. And that's actually it for this episode of The Morgue. Now tune in over the next coming weeks. I intend to do episodes about League of Legends and Firefall, but the exact dates of each of those episodes, when they'll be shooting, I haven't nailed it down yet because I'm trying to get interviews for both of those. So I guess next week's show is kind of a mystery, but I hope you'll join me anyway as I continue to plumb the depths of the online gaming industry. So until then, everybody, play smart and duck! I got you, didn't I? You all ducked. All of you, you were like, oh god. Yep, yep. I got you. Here we go.